Curious about how cities can become more accessible? In this episode of Geographical Thinking, we're talking with Kate and Katherine from the Peach Research Group. Together, we'll explore how GIS is revolutionizing city planning to create more inclusive and connected spaces, from the forward-thinking 15-minute city to the innovative CANdid Access project. Join us on this fascinating journey into the future of urban planning. Welcome back to Geographical Thinking. I'm Michelle Brake, and I'll be your guide as we explore stories, ideas, and conversations through the lens of geography. Joining me today is Katherine Deturbide, a research analyst from Peach and a graduate of Dalhousie School of Planning. Prior to her studies in planning, she studied architecture and biology. This fall, she is starting a PhD program where she will investigate how the various roles in the planning and development process contribute to the provision of accessible housing in Nova Scotia. As well, joining me today is Kate Clark, a project manager with Peach, who has been performing research with Dalhousie School of Planning since graduating with her Master of Planning and becoming a founding member of the Peach Research Unit in 2018. Her recent research interests explore community-level indicators of accessibility, including availability of accessible housing, walk and roll ability, and best practices for shaping environments that are inclusive to community members with disabilities and older adults. Thank you for joining me today, Kate and Katherine, and welcome to Geographical Thinking.
Thanks so much for having us.
Happy to be here.
Yeah. And how are things on your side of the planning and school world? I know the year probably gets off really busy, but now we're into summer. Do things slow down at all, or is this pick it up even more? We've got some more free time between classes.
Things tend to get more busy in the summer, actually, on our end. There's a lot of, student activity at the school that, they're off school, but they're often working with us. And we're kind of supervising a lot of their projects. So that's always busy. We've got a lot of other projects on the go that are just kind of year round. A lot of it involving kind of public engagement and consultations, which tend to be more active in the summertime.
I was going to say it's easier to get people out in nice weather, so we tend to do a lot more community outreach and engagement during this time of year.
Totally understandable. I know also being in Nova Scotia alongside you, going into downtown on the weekends and in the summer, we've got a lot more people milling about that I'm sure would help with getting feedback on surveys and projects. I can understand why that might be a little more beneficial in the nice weather.
Oh yeah, totally. It's, sometimes it's hard to, draw people in on a nice day to, they're enjoying their day and we're like, do you want to do a survey? But we always do end up with, more people that are interested in than in the dead of winter for sure.
Yes, a little bit more snow keeping us cozied up inside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I guess to get us started, what does the Peach in Peach Research Group stand for, and what areas of focus does the research group look at?
Yeah, so Peach is, of course, an acronym. We're established under the School of Planning at Dalhousie University. So our research is really focused on building new knowledge that adds to planning and urban design professions. So the acronym is Planning for Equity, Accessibility, and Community Health. So our focus has really been on accessibility and bringing the perspectives of people living with disabilities and aging populations to how we build inclusive and healthy communities. Our research work really looks at accessibility issues at multiple scales. So this could include design considerations for things like signage and wayfinding, but also looking at the broader sense of accessibility, like spatial access across communities, to access key health enabling services and spaces, for instance.
Okay, sounds like some pretty important topics when we're thinking about the world of planning. And I really appreciate that you're taking such a holistic view into that area with that focus on accessibility. It seems like an area that tends to get glossed over almost in the planning process. So it's really great to hear that consideration does fit into the planning process somewhere. But I'm wondering, how does GIS then also layer into this equation?
Yeah, so we use GIS quite a lot in our work, primarily as either a communication tool or a data analysis tool. So, in terms of communication, we often use GIS to visualize data related to accessibility that can impact the journey of a pedestrian, for example. Um, so, for instance, we'll often make maps that show the slopes of sidewalks, for example, or um, that are indicating what the width of a sidewalk is, so that when people are, potentially preparing for a journey, or they are able to kind of plan accordingly what route they would take. Um, we also use data from, like City of Halifax provides live construction um, update data, so we can represent that in GIS in a live live way, which is really cool. Um, and then in terms of data analysis, we also use it to actually measure the distance of journeys. So we use network data to calculate how long it might take to travel um, to services with many levels of mobility in mind. So, for instance, you mentioned the 15-minute city earlier. That's kind of the ideal benchmark for walkable communities, but 15 minutes isn't the same for everybody. A lot of we kind of assume what 15 minutes is based on kind of an average walking speed, but a lot of people with disabilities, older adults, and children have much slower walking speeds. So we use network analysis to kind of take those into consideration.
On the other hand, with that 15-minute city idea, I know there's been some variety in reception due to misinformation. Can you provide some more background on that for those that may not be familiar with the idea?
Yeah, so the 15-minute city, it's a concept for communities where access to all daily necessities are within an active journey from home. Um, and it's used by planners and urban design professionals as a way of kind of defining what the walkable community or a cycling friendly community should look like. And like you're saying, unfortunately, there's been some misinformation recently about the concept that's led to it being associated with kind of more conspiracy theories and mistakenly understood as a tool for government control or surveillance or keeping people within a 15-minute bubble, when that's not at all what the concept's about. It's about really, it's a goal for building density and encouraging opportunities for healthy activity in populations, and how we should be designing walkable and wheelable friendly landscapes. So yeah, that's
Which I
to
think
sum it up.
is, yeah, I think it's a great idea in terms of wanting to have things nearby. I think of other topics like food security and how we look at accessibility and affordability and like what is the relation of those things. And it's that everybody should have equal access at a certain point, equity preferably, but equality better than nothing. So, like the idea of a 15-minute city is a starting point for accessibility. Um, Sounds like a great thing to work towards. Hopefully we can work on clearing up the messaging surrounding it. Yeah. So overall, great to see that we're looking at having more services accessible for everyone. But I first came across your work through the CANdid Access project while attending the Canadian Institute of Planners conference in Halifax last year. It was such a cool project. I'm wondering if you can share more about it so that people can go get interested and check it out.
Yeah, so the CANdid Access project, it was a crowdsourced web application that we created where people could upload photos and commentary on the condition of accessible or inaccessible spaces that were in their neighborhoods, that were they came across in their daily lives. Um, Most of the submissions that we received were from Halifax, where we're from, but we were, pretty happy to see that there were quite a few submissions from all across the province in Nova Scotia as well. So that was, we were able to kind of contrast more urban, inaccessible or accessible forms with more rural scenarios. Um, and then, so people were able to upload a photo and then describe kind of in their own words what made that feature that they're photographing either accessible or inaccessible to them. So whether it was a barrier or an enhancement to accessibility. And then this information was uploaded to an online map that was published on our website that's publicly viewable, showing a gallery view of the photos with pins on the maps to indicate the location of where each photo is. So you can pan around the map and identify where most of the barriers or enhancements are based on those pins. So we encouraged people. Sorry, just to backtrack a little bit. The way that people were able to upload this was through the Survey 123 app. So it's traditionally used for kind of a field mapping thing, but we kind of opened that up for field mapping for the general public for their own accessible or inaccessible spaces. Yeah.
Yeah, I think part of the great part of CANdid Access was, or not the great part, one of the great parts of CANdid Access was that it kind of originated in conversations with people about how accessibility really varies between different people's needs and how they interact with their environment. And we often like to just label things as accessible, like this is an accessible restaurant or an accessible bus. But it really does vary on who that's accessible for. So the CANdid Access map, using crowdsourcing as its basis, was really valuable because then people could show how the same feature was accessible to them or not accessible to someone else, and in what ways, and just really add that first person perspective to our landscapes and how we perceive accessibility.
Yeah,
And then we also noticed, there were some more of the kind of expected, I guess, barriers to accessibility, like, cracks in the sidewalks or, curb ramps that were too steep or things like that. But it was really enlightening to see, a lot of other barriers that we might not have thought of ourselves. So, people really interpreted that in a way that, meant something to them. So, for instance, people were talking about they'd photograph a storefront that had, scented products, and they said, walking by that was a barrier to accessibility for them because they had sensory sensitivities. So that was it was really cool to see this, like, a range of disability experiences represented in our sample.
And things were talked about that you can't necessarily represent in a photograph, but it was still useful to see where they were encountering those environmental barriers. So
unfortunately, the website's been unable to accept new submissions because the grant funding period expired, but it is still featured on our website for anyone who wants to take a look. The gallery is still there.
And it makes sense. Projects go through different phases. Hopefully, with all that wealth of information there, that it'll have a second life at some point. I know hearing about the project, as well as you briefly talking earlier on about how you get some like live construction data from the city and stuff, it almost makes me think of if there was a way to look at providing that information, because I know in the downtown core especially, we get a lot of construction that's tightly impacting sidewalks and the ability to walk and roll through spaces, of kind of bridging the two together of, hey, what are accessibility concerns surrounding construction in these areas? Maybe you already do that. Maybe I'm just like, it'd be a cool idea. Someone should build it. Who? I don't know, but somebody. Yeah. So thinking more about how projects go through different phases, and there's some amazing analysis that could be done there in the future. What other projects are you working on that are, regardless of phase? Are we intro phase? Are we more into the work with something, or something more long term?
Right now we're working on a project that's been in the works for the past year, and we'll be, continuing to work on it for the next 2 years, I think. It's called Benchmarking Spatial Accessibility. And so for this project, we're focusing on a journey approach to accessibility. There's a lot of standards and regulations that guide the more ergonomic side of accessibility, like door widths, or guidance around pedestrian infrastructure, like curb ramps, or tactile attention indicators like crosswalks. But what's often overlooked in that is the distance required to get from point A to point B, which can itself be a barrier to accessibility if that distance is too far, especially if you have like a mobility issue. Um, what we're wanting to accomplish with this project is to develop clear benchmarks to assess spatial accessibility that's informed by people with lived experience of disability and aging, um, and then look at average journeys in rural, mid-sized, and large settlements across the country. Um, so as part of this, we conducted a survey a few months ago asking over 100 people with experience of disability across Canada to tell us what services they would want to be able to access, either by walking or wheeling, as well as what distances they're willing to travel to reach those destinations. And so we've gone through that survey, we've done the analysis, and right now we're using GIS network analysis tools to calculate what the average shortest distance to these destinations that the participants identified in the survey across a large sample of settlement types across the country. So we're looking at small, medium, and large population centers in like probably well over 30 settlements across Canada. So what we're hoping is that in this way, we can see what the current state of accessibility is within our sample, at least, and then identify some trends of what certain places are getting right in terms of spatial accessibility, but then also what areas can be improved.
And it sounds like a really great kind of next level up to that idea from the 15-minute city to, okay, what is the benchmark for this city or town? Knowing that in Canada, we range from highly dense urban areas to very sparse rural areas, that one number doesn't do it. So it's great to hear that something is being done in that area as cities grow and change, and transit and services don't always change as quickly to accommodate that kind of change within a community. I'm wondering, where does data for this type of study come from?
Yeah, so a lot of the spatial data we've been able to get has been through open data sources. So it's quite common now to see a lot of municipalities publish their data on open data, which is fantastic. Um, that's been really great. We've also been using like the linkable open data environment from Statistics Canada to get address data. They have like an inventory of business data, so we can search through that based on what we found in the survey um, for what type of services people want to be able to access. So yeah, that's been a really great resource for locating business and civic addresses. Um, there are some areas where the data is still quite limited. So in those cases, we've either been able to reach out to planners or GIS specialists at the municipalities, and most of the time they're very accommodating, or able to send us the data, because often they have it. It's just they might not necessarily publish it online. Um, so we've been really lucky in that way that people have been sending us that kind of information. Um, Even still, oh, sorry, Kate.
No, I'm sorry. Just building off that, yeah, the response has been really great. We did have an opportunity Katherine had an opportunity to present on this project through another webinar, and we got a lot of responses from planners and other professionals in Canada saying how it was a great initiative and they wanted to be involved and kind of volunteering their communities to be used as case studies in this. So that's another way of how we've acquired the data, just through the enthusiasm of the planning community in Canada.
Yeah, and then there are even still some more remote areas that just don't have the data yet. That's been a little bit challenging, like especially in rural areas of either the territories or in Newfoundland and Labrador. Data is still quite limited. So for that, we've been relying on kind of aerial imagery to kind of gauge where it looks like there are settlements, and then use dissemination block data from Statistics Canada to identify where there might be population centers in those areas.
Awesome.
And Google is always a good resource too for identifying businesses.
Of course. But it does sound like a great combination of resources, both from municipalities and communities themselves to going out and getting some more of that information, which I'm sure is time consuming overall. And I'm wondering, when I start thinking about this kind of study, I'm wondering where something like third spaces fits in, because they tend to not be overly reported. Like you have libraries, you have like community centers, which are great, and those do come to the forefront. But with over the past 5 years, where things are coming back following the pandemic, that some of these spaces seem to have disappeared or be retreating in a way. I'm wondering, how does this get measured or looked at in this kind of study? Is it something that's popped up yet?
Yeah, it's definitely really challenging to measure these kind of third spaces. A lot of the time, a third space can vary quite a bit depending on where you are. Like in one place, like a library might be the third place, but in another city, maybe it's a beloved cafe that's the third place. So that, those kind of, um, more qualitative observations, I guess we'll say, are, much more, you know, difficult to collect that kind of information. But we're very, we're certainly very interested in third places, and in this project, our kind of way of going about looking at third places is that because people in the survey identified cafes and coffee shops as being one of the places they want to have within walking or wheeling distance. We've been looking at the locations of Tim Hortons across the country,
Mhm.
and because those are kind of, they may or may not be a third place depending on where you are, but they are ubiquitous, and they're quite a Canadian icon, and they are often, especially in rural areas, like Tim Hortons can be a third place in a lot of places. So that's sort of our approach in this particular project, where it is Canada wide. It's hard to pinpoint one certain location, but yeah, we're hoping that even just through looking at how accessible these places are, we can get kind of an idea of shedding some light on how spatially accessible these potential third places are um, in Canada.
And it's great to hear that while there is some look at it, that it's interesting that it's still such an underreported area. But I guess it makes sense, because you need that firsthand knowledge of community members to tell you, where do we consider our third spaces to be. Is it the group of seniors that meets at Tim Hortons every like Saturday and Monday morning as their get together? Is it a knitting group that meets at a library? Is it a book club that meets at a local flower shop when it's closed? So I can understand why there'd be a lot more nuance in that kind of area.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. It's very locally specific, and it
Yeah.
depends on the local context.
I guess that comes back to the like think global and act local, of like, we want these bigger ideas, but like you got to contextualize them more at the local level.
For sure.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's a lot going on for Peach right now that's keeping the team busy. Are there any other projects in the future or on the horizons that you can talk about?
Yeah, so we've always got lots on the go. One of our other projects that we're currently working on is the development of a digital twin city that we're hoping to be able to manipulate to create kind of an accessible version of that that is compliant with the current accessibility standards. So, for instance, we're looking to recreate a streetscape in Halifax that's in a 3D space, 3D digital space that we'll edit in order to meet national standards for accessibility, such as by altering widths of the sidewalks to make it wide enough, or by adding pedestrian crossing signals or tactile indicators. So then, with this product, once we make these models, we're wanting to bring them to focus groups with people with disability experience and gain their feedback on how these spaces could go even further beyond the standards. So that we can make kind of a super accessible version of those spaces. So the hope with that is that we can use this 3D Twin City workspace as a tool that can go towards the continued evolution and enhancement of accessibility standards generally.
And that sounds like an amazing use for the idea of digital twins. I know we see it a lot in the planning and architecture space, and even in utilities management, where you want to have that digital twin so you can start manipulating things. You want to have records of where things are. But I think the idea of using it as a design and collaboration tool with community feedback is a really great example of how we can take the purpose of this being usually seen in more commercial context and bringing it into that community experience and getting feedback, using it as an engagement tool rather than just using it as a talking piece. So that's really exciting. I know that having done some different courses in community planning that we always like to bring out Lego. And we always, it's always the fun time when you get to build a space of, oh, I'm going to use Lego to design what I think a building should look like or what a cityscape should look like. Um, so it sounds like you're finding the right middle ground between let's go really hands-on and tactile, but also still providing a digital experience that could work for more people.
Yeah, I think you make a good point where um, digital models are often used as a site by site basis, right? Like for a particular building or a particular development. And that's often how we see accessibility being applied in digital spaces. So we're really excited about the potential of this to show more of that holistic, the whole city perspective and how those different sites interact through what we talk about as the whole journey approach. Like, how do you get from home to these spaces? And it might be a very accessible library or whatever it is, but if people don't get to it in an accessible way, then you're really not creating an accessible community. So the digital twin city we see as having a lot of potential to open up those conversations and really show why accessibility is just something that needs to be encompassed with how we design all public and private spaces.
Mm-hmm. And it's an amazing range of projects that your group is working on, and so important when it comes to planning and the development of spaces. Who's carrying out this work? I know we have the two of you. Are there students helping support you, or volunteers, or partnerships with community partners, or some mix of all of these?
Yeah, it is a mix of all of these. We're really lucky to be in a position where we have so many opportunities to collaborate and teach and learn from so many partners from both within the school, but also from the community. So Kate and I are both full-time researchers, but we often hire students from the planning program, or we collaborate with them on their research projects. Um, Many students also volunteer with us when we hold events, like when we're conducting surveys or facilitating focus group sessions. So that's often, some really good experience for them as well. Um, and we also rely on many key partnerships from partner organizations, from public, nonprofit, and private sectors. Some of these are local community groups, but others are national organizations such as Rick Hansen Foundation and CNIB. We also work with many community advocates for disability awareness who work tirelessly to make Halifax more accessible all the time. So they've been really instrumental partners in our understanding of accessibility, and getting that first voice is always just yeah, it's so
Yeah,
great.
it's key to everything that
Yeah.
we do. Yeah.
It's amazing to see so much of that collaboration between community and even into the education community. I'm wondering if you have any words of wisdom for people to consider when interacting with their own spaces or wanting to get involved in the planning process more.
Yeah, so we've always found that once you start to notice barriers to accessibility in your built environment or in the buildings you're in, you really start to see them everywhere. Like, you can't go for a walk without noticing a poorly installed curb ramp, or use a crosswalk without testing whether the audible signals are actually working, because oftentimes they're down, or the sound's not working or the light's not working. um, so we would encourage people to start trying to notice these things, like when you're going to cross the street, push the button and see if it works, and if it doesn't, call your municipal services line and let them know where maintenance might be needed, because it may just be as simple as them not being aware that something is broken, um, or maybe they're aware but they need more amplified voices to push them along in the right direction. So yeah, that would be my piece of advice.
Yeah, we've also had some really wonderful opportunities to engage and work with business owners and operators in Nova Scotia through some of our projects about improving accessibility in these, like we were saying, kind of third spaces or these semi-private, semi-public spaces like restaurants and shops. And there's a lot of ways that businesses can make kind of immediate improvements to their accessibility, like even just moving the furniture in their spaces to make sure there's an accessible path to move through, or changing out door handle hardware from a knob to a lever handle, for instance, or different training opportunities for staff. So yeah, these are just changes that are they have long-term impact, and they're small things at first that can all build towards this bigger picture of accessibility. And as customers and patrons of these places, we can all play a role in being a voice for making these improvements.
Awesome. And that's great to hear that there is a path forward, that everyone can start looking at the spaces around them and start thinking and having an impact if they want to. So I guess with that, thank you for joining me today, Kate and Katherine. It was great to hear more about the work that your team is doing, and I can't wait to see where it goes in the future. I know I'll be keeping a close eye on that digital twin project and the benchmark study. Maybe we'll see you at a GIS day in the future and we'll hear all about it. Who knows?
That sounds great. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for joining us on this adventure into the future of urban planning with Kate and Katherine from the Peach Research Group. Keep mapping out a world where everyone's journey is accessible, vibrant, and full of possibilities. If you're looking for more information about the technical side of GIS, check out the Spatial Report podcast, where Mark and Maggie dive into the latest and greatest in the world of GIS. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep thinking geographically.